So, as it says on your screen, I'm Adam Koszary. I'm the new head of digital at the Audience Agency, and I've only been in the job a few weeks. I've been thrown the softball of the very large task of how to integrate your digital offer for my first workshop. No Darth, thanks, Lou. It's good to know there's no Darth Vader breathing yet, but please do tell me if I do slip into it. Despite my new title, I'm still in a constant process of experimenting with and learning about how to use digital tools and technologies to both improve the cultural sector, improve audience engagement, use them in general. As with everything in life, though, there are no silver bullets for the perfect approach in deciding which digital tools will help or hinder you, especially considering how different cultural organizations are. You can see in the chat already, we've got people from art centers, museums, libraries, theaters, and archives. I don't think I could ever hope to solve all of your issues in integrating your new digital offers into how you work in one session. So I'm doing that kind of classic of talking about approaches and talking about data. And that is the first thing I'm going to be talking about. Understanding how audiences are behaving and how that has changed due to the pandemic. That's going to be the first bit of the session. Then, rather than talking hypotheticals, I'm going to go through some approaches to measuring success online and how to tie them to your organizational objectives. And lastly, mainly so that we can stop looking at graphs, I'll be exploring some options for practical approaches to integrating your digital offer, as well as some case studies. And to end, I'm leaving about 15 minutes of Q&A time. So if you have questions throughout this session, please leave them in the chat box. I'll try and round them up at the end, but if I miss it, then you can always put them back in at the end as well. Oh, and I've also got this stupid meme. I keep putting this meme into all of my lists of you do all these things and then you can profit. But if you haven't seen that meme online, then it will make literally no sense. So to recap, we're going to have graphs. There will be things you may already know. There are some things you may not already know, and hopefully you'll go away having learned something, or at least experience something that you might be able to bring back to your work. But first, I wanted to start with casting our minds back to what would this have been, like March or April of 2020? I can't be completely certain, as the whole of 2020 is basically one just gelatinous blob of stress in my memory, with bits of Joe Exotic clapping the doomsday news cycle, police arresting hikers with drones just kind of floating around in there. And I'm also looking forward to every single presentation for the next 10 years, including a wasn't that a weird time slide exactly like this one. This might even be the 50th one you've already seen this year. So I'm going to move swiftly on to what we've been getting on with in the cultural sector. And I'm sure you're sick of people saying, remember Tiger King, remember NHS rainbows. But I also know you're probably exhausted because despite appearances, the pandemic is still raging. Seems to change every day in the news. There's a good chance the government might pull another short lockdown. I still can't quite tell. It seems like there might be a big peak and then it will go into a smaller peak. We have to wait and see, but there may still be some form of restrictions. Many of us have also seen colleagues made redundant. Many of us have taken on even more work. And the goalposts of success have shifted numerous times, all while trying to juggle our personal lives during, let me say it again, a global pandemic. Despite all this, though, I'm proud to work in a sector which has risen to that challenge, I think, of remaining relevant and useful for audiences during this time. I've seen virtual exhibitions, I've seen live stream talks and shows. There's been an explosion of content in social media. Some of it has worked, some of it hasn't worked, but I think what this experience has done has at least accelerated that reckoning with digital engagement that's been hounding the sector for over a decade. But many of us have been putting off that reckoning for good reason. Arts Council value people through the door. That may change in the future with any strategy. And last time I was managing an MPO, they were still lumping together web visits and social impressions as the way of measuring your digital performance online. We've had austerity, we've had tightened budgets, and we have had to make hard decisions on where to concentrate our limited resources, which includes people's time. And the pandemic and subsequent lockdowns have forced us to concentrate on that one channel, just online. But the same thing, at least during this period, has happened to our audiences. Their only method of consumption was through a screen. The issue for us was that we also had to compete with online giants, whether it's streaming services such as Netflix or video games, or all the other people shouting on social media 24/7. But I don't think it was ever about actually beating those other companies and those individuals with better budgets and more staff. We're always going to go back to our doors again and welcome people back to our on-site offers. But that doesn't mean that we should then abandon these online audiences. It also doesn't necessarily mean that our digital offer should be achieving the same things as our physical offer, just replicating that online, or even that we should be measuring its success in the same way as our physical offers. I think ultimately we're entering a period where we can take stock of what has worked and what didn't, what audiences are engaging with and not engaging with, and how we can integrate what's worked of our digital offers into our strategies and ways of working. So let's start with how audiences are behaving. And I'll be using data primarily from the Cultural Participation Monitor. And that, if you don't know it, the Participation Monitor, which is a mouthful, is part of a national research program led for the Centre for Cultural Value in collaboration with Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Centre, also the audience was at the audience agency. Covers the whole population, all sectors. It shows change over time. So there's been 4 of these since autumn 2020. Latest one was autumn 2021, and it's also linked to audience spectrum. So we segment the audiences into categories as well. And you can find all the reports for free online on our website. First thing to say is well-being. Since June of this year, people's well-being has improved, but there's still a long way to go. I think 15% of people said they were less satisfied with their lives now than before COVID. So while a more optimistic and happy audience is great, there's still a sizable amount of people who are worried and dissatisfied with their lives. I can't remember if there was just a flat line. I feel like I'm a flat line. So I guess that'd be a 5, maybe a 6. It's not awful. So what this says to me is, particularly for digital content, tone is important. We need to remain optimistic about the opportunities that are coming back to our sites and how we communicate our offer, but we do have to be conscious of sounding tone deaf. And we also have to be conscious not everyone shares our optimism. We might be having to balance it with digital alternatives. The optimism is nuanced as well. You can be optimistic while still expecting things to be, what's the right word for it? Unsettled in the future. Most people are expecting lockdowns at some points, though fewer people expect them to be happening in 2023 at least, which feels very far away, but I guess it's only a year away. And like I was saying earlier, based on the news, there's a good chance there might be one in 2022 after Christmas, I think, but don't. Who actually knows? Listen to the government and all of their confused noises. We have to plan for the unexpected, though. We're also seeing some reluctance in fully embracing the end of lockdown restrictions since the end of the last lockdown. So the proportion of people happy to attend hasn't actually increased between June and September based on this study. The only major change is an almost doubling of the 11% to 20% saying they were not interested in attending at all. And that significant increase is largely at the expense of those who previously said they weren't comfortable attending until there's been a significant reduction in risk from COVID, which suggests that opinions are hardening up. So they don't see that risk as having lessened at all. And part of that risk, part of this reluctance is down to safety concerns. Crowd management is still the top issue, though it's a little surprising to see hand sanitizer still in there, considering we know COVID is primarily airborne. At the same time, that was a big public message at the beginning of the pandemic, so I'm not too surprised that hasn't sunk in. Ultimately, people are essentially afraid of other visitors. So as a small point, having our COVID safety measures for on-site visits is still a very important thing to be featuring prominently in our websites and as part of our events promotion. In terms of engagement, people are tending to favor the outdoor sites, and a little bit indoor places like galleries, museums, and heritage sites. And I think this could be down to the fact that during a pandemic, they don't require the audience to sit inside near other people for hours at a time, breathing the same air. Whereas with these other sites, you can at least move around and be a bit more self-directed. But people are also looking to the future, and more people are expecting to visit cultural venues. People are actually expecting to visit cultural venues less often than more often. And this could be because people have fallen out of the habit, could be they have less spending power, could be many things, to be honest. I've got a small note here about working from home. We don't know exactly how this is going to play out with a lot of companies adopting hybrid working, governments encouraging people to go back into the office. But there's definitely an audience which tends to skew to the male, the younger and the more culturally engaged, who also have under 16s in their families, which is making that local visit more important for this audience. So essentially, there's a growing segment of, if you're in a place like a town or your local area, you could be driving more visits from people who need breaks from working from home or have more time before work and after work. So as a summary, essentially well-being is improving, but people do expect more restrictions. It's a little bit unsettled. Willingness to attend hasn't completely increased since June. It might be that we're just attracting the same audiences and people are still worried about other people's behavior. Working from home is here to stay, maybe an increased local attendance in future, and people are expecting to engage less in general with arts, culture, and heritage in the coming months. And unfortunately, with a particular decline in interest in festive shows. But now I'm going to move on to the digital, because that only covers really physical participation. And we may see changes in audience behavior as it goes on. It's worth keeping an eye on the cultural participation monitor as time goes on. But for now, I'm going to use this report from Indigo, who have been surveying how engaged audiences have been consuming or not consuming digital content and offers. They did the latest round in June this year, and it's got a good sample size of over 92,000 responses, sourced from about 258 organizations, but it does primarily focus on live cultural events. But it does have lessons for all of us, I think. And what they found is that a high proportion of this audience engaged with digital content from arts organizations for the first time since lockdown. There was a sizable minority still just haven't bothered. You can see here how this has changed from before lockdowns on the left, during lockdowns in the middle, and after lockdowns on the right. So a large proportion of people who, even if they didn't engage with digital content during lockdown, they are still possibly interested after lockdown. So there's more of this acceptance that was before they just may not have cared. They're now more open to the idea that there's something to be gained from digital content and digital offers from organizations. Those who are more keen to engage with this digital content tend to skew much younger on average, though it's got to be remembered that for a lot of organizations, the core audience does tend towards the older. So in absolute numbers, you might still be seeing more of the older segments actually engaging with your digital content, but it just means there's an opportunity here for younger audiences to bring them in and get them engaging with you purely online. In terms of type of content, the vast majority have accessed streaming a creative performance, with far fewer taking advantage of activities or paying for a subscription service. But to be fair, this probably reflects the kind of content organizations were producing in the first place anyway. So you would expect more full-length productions to be popular because that was what we were producing. And only a few organizations are getting onto this idea of subscription services and really tailoring their public engagement program to digital as well as physical. Now, it's no surprise here to see that those who have engaged with digital content before and since the lockdowns are interested in continuing with their online engagement. But there's still a lot of convincing of other audiences that's worth their time, as I said earlier. got to be honest, I don't really know why I put in this slide, because I think it's just repeating that same point, that people who previously weren't interested now are interested. So let's just double down on that point. In terms of interest in different event formats, though, 78% of respondents are kind of keen on a performance which is online exclusive, and also for revisiting old performances in the archive. So live as a category always seems to outperform recordings that are then just released, say, as a video. And of course, the benefit of a well-done live event is that it then exists as a recording anyway to satisfy others. But there's something in there of being there and it being a unique experience that's happening right in front of you, and you can engage with people during the event as well. But there's something happening here. So during lockdown, this is interesting event formats, regardless of whether they've accessed them. During lockdown, it was expected that organizations might mimic what we were all missing from physical visits. So replicating what we were doing on site, putting it online. But now that we live in this quasi-pandemic world where physical visits are possible, our online offer, I think, needs to shift from just purely representing what people used to do physically, and it needs their own uniqueness as part of that event to be worth it. So it's not just a copy and paste job, but it has something extra to it. Now, there's a lot more worth looking into the Indigo report. I think it will be sent around after this event as well, but you can also Google it. But here's some of the conclusions from it, at least. The first is that a hybrid offer is becoming almost essential, considering this uncertainty around whether there'll be future restrictions, people unwilling to attend because they're scared of other people, but also this interest in these types of online content. Also, that digital experiences should be differentiated from live ones. So I think we could all agree that the live event will always be better. I think seeing a concert, a comedy show, seeing an exhibition in person will always be better than seeing it through a screen. But online experiences do at least allow us to, you can pause, you can carry on the conversation through social media. If audiences aren't taking up the streaming of live events, we could instead be surrounding those events with things like pre-performance interviews, creating an online-only series of events, or an accompanying article series for those live events. So not just saying, here's the event, which you could have seen in person, but also here's this extra package around it. Now, particularly in the Indigo report, it does talk about quality, but it talks about it in terms of offering options which aren't normally available when you're sitting in a seat. So if you're streaming a performance, they think quality in terms of you don't just have one camera angle, you have maybe multiple camera options, which you can go around on. But I think there also needs to be this idea of a baseline of quality, but not necessarily everyone needs to afford 10 cameras in a broadcast center. So you can shift around during a live stream, because that's just not feasible for basically all of us. But there is a certain expectation of quality, I think, from audiences, because they're so used to slick online content from other organizations. But I think it means that we just need more best practice in terms of video, just having good quality audio, good quality video, making sure our events are run properly online. And even things like, if your public engagement team are running online workshops, the best practice in terms of how you run those with live captions, all the rest. Things essentially things need to not look amateur, because people are used to that slickness. I don't think it needs to cost the world. Digital experience shouldn't just be differentiated from live ones. There could also be differentiation. God, that's a mouthful. Differentiation between different kinds of digital offer. So this is the idea that you are not just putting it all out there for everyone, but say if your older audiences, and this is very broad stroke, they may want that pure, just take a video of this event so I can watch it at home and watch it afterwards. Whereas younger audiences may want that live Q&A on Instagram with people involved in the performance beforehand. You may even be in a position where you can offer benefits to members or friends. So it's the idea of essentially segmenting your audience and giving them different types of content depending on what they're interested in and what they tend to like out of your program. And that comes into this because there's a suggested in the report that to make our content more curated, we should be consolidating on only a few channels. And they think of that in a way that it'd be easier for users if everyone's live performances run one kind of platform, like a BFI player or a Netflix. But obviously that isn't going to work for everyone. But you can think of it more in terms of where your audience is. So you could be curating your own content in terms of, are your family activities better concentrated on Facebook? Like, is there any points I'm putting them on Instagram or YouTube when your audience is purely there and you can have whole playlists dedicated to them? Is all your interactivity focused on Instagram rather than wasting your time on Twitter or somewhere else? And is your website and your YouTube the place where people go for those long views and long looks? I still can't get used to online talks either. Because in my mind, my voice is just this constant, like slightly Midlands monotone. I feel like it's just going to send you all to sleep. But like, I hope you're not, essentially. It is only Tuesday. That was actually the point I just said. I'm just getting ahead of myself. So this is part 2. I hope you're still with me. Because before going to some of the practicalities of integrating your digital offer, I wanted to touch on measuring success. And this is mainly because I know a lot of you will already be on top of your digital metrics and statistics, but I still hear from everyone in the sector that they just don't know how to justify their digital content. And particularly as more teams have got involved with digital offers and digital content, they look at the kind of metrics that come from social media, from your website, from everywhere else. Thanks, Carrie. It's good to know you're still here. They can't tie that to the metrics they're used to in real life, which is people in the workshop having an amazing experience, and you get that emotional face-to-face connection. Facebook likes just don't really cut it. So I'm going to focus primarily on 2 things. One is, how do you actually measure the impact of digital content? And within that, how do we marry up digital metrics to the kind of real life impacts of colleagues and teams tend to value? And the other is the fact that we are massively overstretched, and we're now being faced with having to juggle the increased importance of digital work with everything we did in our pre-pandemic world too. And I can speak from experience, having just been working at the Royal Academy of Arts. So I've been in the position of probably where many of you are now, where you're trying to juggle all these things. The pandemic has been intense, and trying to get buy-in from colleagues. So essentially what we can drop and what is worth continuing with, and insights into the performance of content, which can help inform those decisions. So first, it's worth recapping what we mean by data and metrics, and I won't go into masses of detail as this isn't really meant to be a digital marketing webinar. But then again, Google Analytics isn't just for measuring performance of marketing campaigns. It's for tracking who uses your website, what they're doing, insights into why they're doing it and where they've come from. So as more colleagues and more teams may be using your website as a tool for their own work, it's not just gearing the website to marketing decisions, it's also decisions affecting public engagement and everything else an organization does, which means people may need to get to grips with what Google Analytics is and how you can turn these into actionable insights. I just started a sentence there and then just came out of a load of digital marketing buzzwords and hopes it made sense. I don't know if any of you noticed. To make it as useful as it can be, though, you need to set up Google Analytics properly. So this means inserting the code into your website, obviously, so Google can start tracking people, following users around in its creepy way. You can also switch on site search, so you can see what people are searching on your website, indicating whether they can't find something, whether something is more popular, looking at trends. You can add filters to your reporting, so excluding traffic from within your own organization, usually. Switch on demographics reporting, but also tracking events, which is probably one of the most key things you can do. So you can tell Google that an important event for you is something like a ticket sale, an email sign up, or even people just making it to, say, a downloadable resource from your public engagement team. And then tracking the journey that user took to triggering that event. Now, if you're setting up a Google Analytics account for the first time, you'll also notice it's different to the old one. It's called Google Analytics 4, and hands up, I'm yet to get to grips with it. I will be very soon. I do know that they've done a lot more to enable tracking of users across different devices. So if you're logged into a tablet and your phone and your laptop, it's doing a better job of tracking you everywhere. Again, very creepy. They're trying to use more machine learning to predict what people might do in your website, so how you then might improve your experience. They've integrated Google Ads a bit more deeply, and probably a ton of other things, which I just haven't discovered yet. Otherwise, in terms of data, there's our old friend, social media. Now, regardless of platform, the data these channels tend to give us is usually falling into one of three camps: the amount of people you've reached or potentially reached, impressions, how many times people have interacted with your posts, the engagement, and the growth and demographics of your audiences. I'm going to be talking about UTMs a little bit later, but obviously you can also use hashtags to measure campaign performance. Evaluation is a constant process with social media. Again, just about to go on to it. And I'm going to talk about KPIs as well, because by themselves, this kind of data can be a bit ethereal. And if you or colleagues of yours have only recently started engaging with digital content, like I said at the beginning, they can seem a bit pointless when you compare them to people through the door, tickets bought, and other like real life metrics. So each social media site, and again, I know some of you may already, this is just your bread and butter, but just in case, each social media site can give you its own analytics for how your posts are performing, though they kind of vary in how useful they are. Facebook gives you almost too much information, if I'm honest. And it's also a pain in the ass to wade through their 50 million pages and to really dig into the Facebook Insights Manager to find out what the numbers mean. Instagram hides their analytics within the phone app if you have a business account, and Twitter at least gives you a bit more of a digestible monthly summary and a clear export button. On top of this, there's also something called Facebook Creator Studio. So if you have a Facebook business page, you can get behind the scenes with that, and you can tie Instagram to it and have a bit more of a user-friendly look at your statistics. But that's probably for another day. Something simpler you could do is just hook yourself up to a third-party social media platform like Hootsuite, but there are also ones like Falcon or Sprout Social. Most of them offer a free option, but if you want to start adding a load more people to give access to it so that they can post and look at reports, the price can jump pretty spectacularly. But one of the most useful functions of these tools is that you can tag your posts, so you can say whether something's for an event or your collections or whatever. So you can segment your content and compare how well different types of posts perform. You can also pull in data from all of your social media channels into one, rather than having to go to all these individual websites. So it's also just a bit of a time saver. It's pretty much their entire business model is stopping you jumping from social media site to social media site. However, I found when you're looking at impacts, you're almost always looking for something achieved on your website from social media. So a large part of what you're trying to do on social media is actually get people to the website to do something useful. Which isn't to say that social media should just be about sending people to a website, obviously, because building a community, building engagement and raising awareness are ends within themselves. But if part of your objectives are to get people to buy tickets or do something like that, you do need them on your website. And while Google Analytics will tell you how many people come to your website from places like Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or TikTok or Pinterest. They don't tell you whether these visitors came from your own page or from your own accounts. And this is why you need to use UTM tracking links, because they allow you to pinpoint traffic from specific campaigns. So you can say that this amount of people came to the website from this Facebook post that we posted, and then this amount of them went on to buy a ticket or do something else useful, if you have those events set up. And you do this by essentially adding little bits of code to the end of your links, telling Google that someone has come from Facebook, that it's Medium as social media, and as part of this campaign, say for Christmas. And Google has a free URL builder, but you can also set up spreadsheets that kind of build it for you automatically. So it's a way of pinpointing and saying, well, what was the point of this post about an event? And you can track exactly how many people came to your website and whether they did something useful. You can also create dashboards to make all of the data from things like Google Analytics and other sources a bit more palatable for your colleagues. And again, I won't go into tons of detail because it's not particularly what this webinar is about, but you can use things like Google Data Studio, Tableau, Power BI. There are lots of options for it, essentially. Actually, it's worth saying why we do this, because I feel like half of what I'm trying to say here is it's relying on a certain person or people within an organization to kind of cut out the pain of digital metrics, and that they make no sense to a lot of people. And it's almost your job as the filter to translate them into something that makes sense for them. And you need these kind of tools to make it legible for them. And this is a very crappy slide just to say there are multiple other sources of data. Because you could obviously also be tracking the effectiveness of your e-newsletters. What is the most popular content? What is getting click-throughs? What isn't? Tweaking your copy, doing A/B tests and all the rest. Website and in-person surveys. Assessing motivations, why people visiting your website, why they're consuming your content. Getting some qualitative feedback as well for when numbers, I don't think numbers tell as good a story by themselves. You need something on top of it to say, and this is what one person said that kind of summarizes this opinion. And obviously you could be focused on e-commerce. If you're particularly focused on your shop, how do users find their way there? Questions like, why do people drop off on their visit? Why do they do that? Etc. I think all of this is kind of just coming up to this slide, because there is an issue with data. Because at the heart of understanding impact of what you're trying to achieve online is obviously through data. Because otherwise we're operating for pure instincts, just throwing things out in the wild. But the issue with social media, Google Analytics, everything else, is it throws us metrics like impressions, reach, engagement, follower growth, sessions, goals, bounce rates, and we kind of take them at face value and we try to say to people, yeah, this is how we measure success online. But it ends up with situations where people ask you how something did, and you say it got 2,605 impressions on Facebook, and their eyes glaze over, and they find it very difficult to tie it back to some kind of real world impact. Or we say we had like 3,000 impressions on this web page, but we don't say half of them came from the same IP address, or nobody actually did what you wanted them to do in that web page. They just looked at it and left. So digital tools and technologies, they remain a means to an end, but you need to figure out your end to begin with. So what are you trying to achieve? If teams you're working with are getting to grips with digital for the first time, what are they trying to achieve? What does impact look like to them? For instance, your public engagement team may not really care about broad engagement and reach numbers. They're more used to having people in the room. So reporting how many people attended online workshops, say, and comparing it to the people who used to attend physical workshops might be a good enough metric in itself. Or say they're interested in accessibility. So really, you need to be reporting on things like how many people accessed accessibility resources on the website through Google Analytics tracking. One example of an organization that kind of grappled with this, trying to start with objectives first, was Royal Academy of Arts, which I just left. I can't take credit for this. This was done by my old manager, Louise Cohen. So they interpreted digital metrics on their own terms, figuring out the broad impacts they wanted to achieve, which in their case was growing their audiences, deepening the relationship with them, converting them into friends and customers, and then retaining them. And then finding digital metrics that came under those funnels, essentially. And if you work in marketing, you'll realize that this basically fits into the marketing funnel. But I've found with other teams that funnels like this are actually a revelation. And you can do a lot of hearts and minds by simply reterming it the engagement funnel, because it essentially works like public engagement in the same way. You're trying to get people down to this connection, which in marketing you call a conversion. So you can say that connection is you want people engaging with your workshop or coming to your event. But obviously to get people to do that thing online, we need to make them aware of it, get them interested, get them to consider doing it, do the thing, and then ideally form a relationship and come back. Those kind of goals, though, work better when they're measurable. It's not enough to just say we want people to come to the workshop. So it's almost like driving this evaluative culture with your colleagues. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you to make key performance indicators. So what you want to improve, it's essentially looking at what you want to improve and making sure the results will then influence your decision-making on how you spend your time and money. So for example, increasing the percentage of your younger audience, that may mean focusing on content relevant to them at its most basic, maybe some advertising, increasing signups to a newsletter. If a team wants that, that requires a campaign. It might require a new marketing offer to get people interested. If people want click-throughs on their newsletter, you then have to encourage content aligned to that objective. But having worked in the cultural sector for a while now, I do also know what it's like to work with KPI paralysis. Like you can fall into this trap of attaching a KPI to everything and then you're just drowning in it and you can't track absolutely everything. And it all just ends up like this meaningless slog that no one ever pays any attention to. So I would recommend just focusing on a few things which matter and not trying to pin it to every single event, where you can make it as part of a broad activity. So a few different activities fall under the same KPI, do so. And that ties into making sure they are actually actionable. So you have the energy to say, oh, we did meet this target or we didn't meet this target. What do we actually do afterwards? And ideally kind of taking out the sting of responsibility over that as well. So it's not reporting on a KPI and it failed and feeling very responsible for that failure, but the idea that you are actually going to work together on it as a team. A ton of my KPIs just fell flat on their face during the pandemic, I can say that, but we at least came together as a team and figured out why and reviewed them. And it's not enough to have that data. It also needs to be communicated. You might have seen the semi-naff picture doing the rounds on LinkedIn. But the core of this diagram is actually quite a good one. It's often your job to take all of this data from the website, from social media, to sort it into your objectives, present it to your colleagues, and then tell the story of what's happened and what you're going to do about it. And this could be in the form of an email with written insights, could be presentations that you do regularly, could be bumping into people in the kitchen. I've often done like weekly or bi-weekly content coffees even, because people are interested in how things are doing. They just need someone to interpret it for them. In terms of measuring success, just to round up, I think you should be working backwards from the impact you want to see, rather than starting with those metrics available to you, because there are too many metrics to get a handle on. You have to focus on what's key for your organization. Setting up all of this tracking, getting into the habit of using UTM links, having dashboards, it is a slog, but it does definitely save you time in the long run. And getting into the habit will, well, you'll thank yourself afterwards when you have that data to hand. And don't forget the communication, because demystifying these metrics for your colleagues will help with people buying into digital content in future. And obviously you can't make informed decisions on what to do and what not to do without having that data to hand. But I think you'll be glad to know that is where I'm leaving all of the data and the graphs. And now I'm coming to integrating your digital offer, which, like I said, could be useful. I could be talking out of my arse. Probably shouldn't say that as someone working in a consultancy agency, but I feel like everyone is still getting to grips with this, and it is about approaches. It's not a one-stop shop solution. Because we are, I think even the most well-funded and organized of institutions went through this reactive phase in the pandemic. And as time's gone on, as we've realized that COVID isn't getting away, we've realized that the necessity of a digital offer also isn't going away. We're not going to go back to normal. And a digital offer and digital content was always going to become more essential as time went on. The pandemic has simply accelerated that timeline. And more importantly, that isn't a bad thing, because the benefits of a hybrid offer and digital content are pretty compelling in terms of just pure accessibility. Online content means people who can't leave the house for whatever reason, people who can't make it to our locations, they might live in another part of the country, can now access content they previously couldn't have, and making sure that it has live captioning and all the other accessibility features is essential. You're also creating more value around a visit or an offer if it's truly hybrid. So it's about forming that relationship both when they come on site, but also having online content around that visit that makes it more valuable. And simply, we've known this for years, but our audiences make decisions on where to visit, how to spend time, and how to spend money through the internet. So being there and informing that process is also essential. And even if you take, say, money and the pure capitalism out of it, our core missions are engaging with the public and engaging them with arts and culture. And if our audiences are spending almost all of their time online, we simply can't achieve our missions without being there and engaging with them there. Even if it's just shouting about the culture wars, maybe it's probably not a good way of going about it. And I'm aware, unfortunately, that meeting this challenge comes back to this classic pyramid, but I wanted to include it because we as a sector tend to fall into this trap where we all assume we have to be producing an insane amount of content all the time, have the perfect ticketing system, be producing world-class videos. It doesn't help that we're surrounded by everyone else doing the same sort of things. But ultimately, one of these is going to have to give. And I don't think you should necessarily feel bad about which corner you cut. And Hannah, yes, the slides will be available. We'll be sending them around after the webinar. I don't think, bigger organizations can afford to do things quickly and well usually. But for my 2 cents, I'd always recommend going for the quality, even if that comes at the cost of taking more time. Because I think doing lots of things badly reflects more badly on you. I don't have data to back that up. That's just my experience of working in social media and content for years. And you may be in this position where you've pumped out a lot of new digital content during and since the lockdowns, and you're wondering what the point of it all is. And this is a big ask, because I know we're constantly all sprinting to stay still. But to get things right, I think this is a perfect time for something like a content audit. It's a bit of a misleading name, actually, as I think this could almost be called an activity audit, because you shouldn't just be listing everything you've produced as content, but also all of your activity which could be turned into content, whether that's just taking a photo, turning something it produces into an online resource, whatever that may be. The point of it is to see where your gaps are, but also if there are activities which are taking up tons of your time but aren't producing results, or if you're only focusing on one channel, or if it's all falling unfairly on one person's head. It's kind of just seeing like where the stresses are and how to go about fixing it. And I don't think you should be looking at exact numbers when you do these things, because you could get really into the weeds on posting exactly how much engagement something has done. You could almost do above average, average, and below average for, say, how certain content performs, because you're really looking for those trends and where your impact is. And it does kind of require you to have the data of how things perform at your fingertips. But if you haven't done that, then it's also a good blunt tool to start with, to say, we're doing all this activity, but none of it's making it online, or all of our activity is focused on marketing, but there's nothing from curatorial or events or whatever. I might send around a bit of a draft content audit sheet that I've been working on, because I feel like I've explained that really badly, but I'm hoping you get the principle of it. And essentially, these are the things I've just been talking about. You're looking for your bottlenecks. You could also be doing a digital skills audit alongside that. So consider which new roles, new skills, roles in your organizations require. You could be creating a realistic training plan around the gaps in those skills. There are free resources for doing that. YouTube and Google, top of them. You should consider it CPD. But you could also be working with volunteers, trustees, even people in your local community to identify people who can help you with certain skills, certain pieces of content. And I've got some things at the end about how you can get some help with a skills audit, particularly if you're a heritage organization. You also need a system or framework for deciding what kind of digital offer makes sense for you. Make sure it's achieving the impacts you want it to. I usually recommend the objective first framework. And I use this to kind of get you out of the rut of, we're doing this event, so put it on Facebook. And instead, you begin with, what are you actually trying to achieve with that event, or just in general? And then seeing what kind of digital content best serves that objective, rather than just saying, oh, everything needs to have a social media post. Maybe something would actually be more effective as a website campaign. Maybe it's better in the newsletter. Maybe it doesn't even need to be on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. As an example, this is a bit of an old one, but like, say, we used to run late events. So I used to work at the Museum of English Rural Life. And to start with, we asked them what the objective was. They wanted to attract a millennial audience, which is this age, I think it's 25 to 40 now. And then we tied digital goals to that objective, put some KPIs on it, and then tailored some content to achieve that ultimate objective, rather than just saying, yes, we'll have to just stick something on social media and hope for the best, and then say, here's a time frame and here's going to do it. And this is a bit of like an ideal situation, because obviously you can't do this for everything, but I think for specific events, this kind of framework really helps. It is about the audience need too, obviously, particularly online. There are tons of things fighting for everyone's attention, because you can have a campaign like this one perfectly crafted to achieve exactly what you want, but if it completely misses on what your audience wants, then it's going to fail. I've stolen this slide again from the Royal Academy of Arts, but I think the principle remains the same for basically every organization. It's getting it into people's heads that there is something that would be perfect for us, but we still need to tailor it to what people actually are interested in online. One way of getting into your audience's heads to understand about that need, obviously there's Audience Finder if you're an NPO or otherwise, which rerun, which can segment your audience according to demographics, interests, and behavior. But you could also be constructing personas. And this is essentially just creating like a fake person who reflects the kind of audience you're trying to attract. And then you put an idea against this persona. So you say, we have this video we're thinking of running for this purpose. Does Mark, 22, would he care about it? Is he even using Facebook? Would this interest him in actually getting to the events? And is there then a way in this post for him to get to that event? And if it turns out, according to these personas, that content fails at its job, then you need to go back to the drawing board. But you could also, shock horror, test your ideas on real people. But I haven't seen a real person in 2 years, so I'm still not entirely sure if they exist. Once you've got all your ideas, you make sure they work with audiences. There is the matter of actually doing stuff. A lot of you have probably already experimented with a ton of online tools because of the pandemic. But I can guarantee few of you have managed to replicate the kind of creative brainstorm that was possible in person, which is so essential to coming up with good ideas for digital content in particular. The best one I've found that kind of meets the old post-itting brainstorming sessions is something called Miro. There's a ton of things that do something similar, but this one's essentially a digital post-it board, and you can make it work for online. You can put in tables, you can have different colored post-its for different people. You could be brainstorming impacts and objectives, but you could also just be planning out like projects, monthly or quarterly content on a timeline. Useful tool, particularly for social media content. As I said earlier, you could be using third-party social media tools to bring them into the content pipeline. So whenever you say you're involving people in digital, they often assume that that means they think you want them to post on Instagram, and they get terrified. But actually, it's more drawing them into a process where maybe they contribute images, but don't necessarily have to post. A large part of keeping things ticking is also having some sort of momentum. In between these planning and reporting sessions, it's worth having a channel dedicated to digital content and social media. This can be used for asking for feedback, showing pictures of day-to-day work. I remember I used to work at Bodleian Libraries, and one of these channels is the only reason we found out there was like a unicorn balloon floating at the top of the like 3-story building, which then turned into a nice piece of content. But it's also for people just sharing articles, best practice, things they see on the internet day to day. Depending on your organization, you may already have like a Teams channel or Slack, but I find WhatsApp also works. But it does take a bit of effort. You're kind of like almost trying to make it a community within the place you work, not like forcing people to post their best memes, because people have terrible taste in memes. Planning in content is where it gets a little trickier. I don't think anyone's ever actually found out a perfect system. And it always requires some training, somebody to enforce the rules. You could be working in a kind of workflow way using something like Trello, just top right. At Reading Museum, we had this workflow where you have a card for an article idea. You'd have your name attached to it. And as it went from an idea to a draft to publication, you just move it along and people could add comments to it, that kind of thing. Excel and Google Sheets are always good as well, just for putting in content, particularly if you get together monthly for content brainstorms, put them in a sheet. You can't really add people to that, so there's a lot more chasing, but it works and it's free. I've also been experimenting with tools like Airtable, which essentially do everything Excel does, but you can also turn them into like Gantt charts and calendars and loads of other things. Essentially, just try some things and find the best tool for you. And you may have heard about working iteratively, and particularly with digital content, it's this idea that it never sleeps. So if you're in the system of meeting monthly or weekly or whatever, it's constantly looking at how your formats are performing, how your content is performing, and changing based on what that data is telling you. And you can use these planning tools and those data tools I've been going through to present those insights and then have this discussion of what you change next. But it's worth remembering that these tools are meant to make your life easier. If they're not making your life easier and it's not getting buy-in, it might be worth changing. It all depends on how you work, because overcomplication definitely turns people off. And you need to make sure people know their places within your system, and keep to it if that's going to be the way you're going to work. But you do need to know at what point is the system broken and do we need to change things? So it's always worth, again, even working iteratively in terms of how you use things like this to make sure it's all ticking over. Because it is pretty much always about culture change. It is about working with your colleagues. And I say bloody, I'm not trying to be ungenerous to the hardworking people of our sector. It's just a fact that a lot of places are used to working in a certain way with certain outcomes, and doing all this new digital stuff is often treated as a burden, sometimes a pointless burden. But where there's a will, and that, no, what I was going to say, usually there is a will there to be getting to grips with digital and digital content, but they just desperately need the knowledge, skills, and capability to do it properly. And it often requires someone to almost be spending as much energy getting buy-in and training colleagues as it does to actually be doing the work. And I've got this diagram from work done by Dafford James at Museums Cardiff, National Museums Wales, and Katie Price at the V&A, looking at how organizations digital tends to evolve from no one knows what they're doing, decentralized, to maybe making it one person's job or a team's job. And then this kind of hub and spoke model where you're sharing expertise among different teams until eventually everyone has digital as part of their roles and it's all working holistically. It's a good thing to read through if you haven't seen it. If you're more at the beginning of your digital journey, I'd recommend using the Digital Culture Compass, which is developed by us at the Audience Agency alongside quite a few others. It's essentially a self-assessment tool providing a practical framework for improving your digital strategy, planning, and activities. And once you're registered, you can assess your current status, where you are in your journey, set targets, and it can also generate reports for your colleagues. I mentioned digital skills earlier. One option for you is the DASH survey. So it's mainly for the kind of organizations funded by the NLHF. And it's running now for 2021. But I'd highly recommend taking part of that if you're unsure of where to go with digital skills. And now I'm on to case studies, which felt like a weird, probably should have like a bit of a bridge slide there, but what are you going to do? I've got some case studies of places which I feel like have integrated digital. It's almost like they made it, it's very clear it's part of their mission and they've thought about it quite well. One is Wellcome and their journalistic approach to content. So instead of just saying, we're doing all this stuff on site, how do we take that and turn it into articles? They work in a very journalistic way. So they know which formats tend to work well and they stick to them. And then they try and fit their public program into those formats. And they're very much focused on that idea that they are the Wellcome Collection rather than just promoting the Wellcome Collection. And they've also done interesting things in simply keeping to a regular schedule, which I know is really difficult. And they tend to do a lot of commissioning. So, I mean, the Wellcome has money, but you could find a way working with partners. I talked about differentiation of content from the data at the beginning. This museum have done an interesting thing where they have their own YouTube channel, and then they have a separate YouTube channel aimed at young adults, which the content in it is more informative and more bite-sized. And they have similar amounts of subscribers on both. But it means that people who might be turned off by some of the probably drier content on Rijksmuseum don't get that served to them because they're focused on Rijkstube and vice versa. It's kind of the same principle of Tate Kids, where Tate Kids can just really concentrate on one thing and doing it really well. And it's still got a presence on the Tate website, but people know to go here, they know it's all for kids, and they don't have to worry about anything else. And they find really fun ways of incorporating their public program into the different kinds of activities on Tate Kids. National Gallery have started doing purely online events. And in terms of that, again, curation and appealing to particular core audiences, very often they're free to members. So the National Gallery probably has members all over the country, and it's serving those audiences post-pandemic by having events which they can get involved with as part of their membership package. Firstsite during the pandemic, they knew that they still wanted to encourage people to take part in art online. They knew people were still stuck at home. And they did something very simple of just making a physical art activities pack and just making it downloadable and getting artists they work with to contribute. We don't all know Grace and Perry to get involved with something like this, but it's just to say that integrating a digital offer doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes it is just opening it up online and doing a good marketing campaign. I know young vicars have also committed to a series of online-only performances. And that, again, is meeting that need of something. This is like a really good example of some people still really just want to see performances online, but they want it to be high quality. And this is a very high quality offer. It's not all of us can afford. And the Novi Museum did something interesting, and they're still continuing to do it, where they're offering virtual field trips. So obviously schools would still come if they could, because nothing beats coming to a site and seeing everything. But whether it's because of budget or because of the pandemic or whatever, they have short videos and activity sheets and optional loans boxes they can mail out to you, so you can still learn everything there is about the museum and the heritage, but you can do it from the classroom or even at home. So those are just some of the many case studies to consider. There's also a bit of a spectrum. Some have found new ways of providing a service both online and physically. Some are very attuned to audience needs and are thinking digital first. Some are still kind of teasing out the best way of providing what was normally a physical offer, but doing it online. But to conclude, integrating your digital offer, I think, is still about that really annoying thing, which is strategy. And not necessarily just digital strategy, but about weaving kind of audience-centered, evaluative, and iterative culture into everything your organization does. And digital is just one of your tools as part of that. But it's becoming more and more of an important tool, as we're seeing audiences are interested in online content and may not be coming back, that we still not be having the physical numbers we used to have on site. It might require upskilling, it might require getting your data in order, it might require buy-in from colleagues, but above all, it requires energy. It takes energy to do things, but it also takes will and energy to get people to sit back, take a moment to take stock of your activity and audiences, and make a sustainable plan. And that is me. But if you've got questions, you can put them in the chat and I can read them out. I can show you my face, but if you do want to leave, thank you for coming. Please do fill out the evaluation form, which will be emailed out to you, because I need to know whether this was, what can be approved as part of these kind of talks, whether you'd like more interaction, whether some of the topics were relevant or irrelevant. Let's try and see if there are any questions from earlier. I don't think so. Okay, question from Sarah. How do I balance the pressure to promote the exhibition? Oh God, that's a good question. I think it was enforcing. So how I balanced the pressure of like promoting what had to be promoted, as well as driving strong user engagement on social. At the Royal Academy, we were quite lucky in that we had quite strong-willed managers and colleagues who saw the importance of digital engagement in terms of creating a community and engagement for its own sake, as well as the useful things like promoting exhibitions and events. I shouldn't say useful, it's all useful. And enforcing almost for every exhibition and event, we almost have a package. So you get a baseline level of this is what we'll do for each exhibition and event, which is usually we'll post on it X amounts of times a month. And before every exhibition, we had an exhibition plan where we'd say, this is the content we're going to do. And any extra is essentially just if we have time for it. So it's creating a process for that. rather than fighting fires. And it helped that we were working under a content strategy that said we also treated things like driving audience engagement, follower growth through digital first campaigns almost on equal footing with the other things we were doing, and that had been signed off by senior management. So again, it's a bit of a culture change thing. And the KPIs we were most driven by, it kind of depended on the exhibition. I think like everyone else, even though everything I just said, like they need to be a bit more sophisticated, we did focus on engagement rates and follower demographics and follower growth. We were going to look at those again just before I left. But for exhibitions, we would be looking at exhibition click-throughs to the website and views on video, engagement with exhibition content broadly, because we couldn't have enough time to be a bit more sophisticated than that. But I hope that's enough of an answer, Sarah. And another Sarah Robson recommending a social media management system on a budget. Yeah, Hootsuite is expensive. There is a free option. One member of staff, you can still use Hootsuite. And Hootsuite, I find a little bit crap, mainly because I don't like how it looks and how it works. Falcon is also quite a nice one, and they do a good free offer. But I need to look it up. I think they might slightly strangle the reporting features. But if you're just using it for posting and scheduling, it's really good. One thing which is amazing is if you do have a business page and a business Instagram account, Facebook Creator Studio is amazing, mainly because you can schedule Instagram posts, which you can do on other sites as well. But Facebook Creator Studio allows you to schedule carousel Instagram posts, which you can't really do on anything else yet. So I feel like Facebook is slowly waking up to doing it just as well as tools like Hootsuite. They're doing better on that front, and less so on the promoting coups in America and driving the world into a flaming pit side of Facebook. I'm usually much more cheerful than this. Facebook is the worst though. Okay, any more questions? One from Sophie about the value placed on distribution partners for digital projects. I would actually place huge value on distribution partners. And I've been in that position where you've had a small social media following, and it feels like just banging your head against a brick wall because you need the followers to get the reach. You can't get the followers without getting the reach in the first place. It's almost like you're stuck in this stupid circle where you could be posting amazing content, but because the audience isn't there, it feels kind of futile. So working through networks is something I always try to promote, even if it's individuals, or if it's just asking favors of other social media managers at other organizations, or working through local destination sites, like, the Visit Birminghams of this world, that kind of thing. I think social media is just a game of getting yourself in front of as many people as possible with the most engaging content possible. And if you have few followers, you need to be working through networks to be getting in front of people in the first place, I think. Obviously, it's a bit trickier on Instagram because their algorithm is different and sharing is different, but you can still be doing stories and all the rest. I think really we should be helping each other as much as possible. And one from Lauren, schedulers which allow you to schedule Twitter threads. No, I don't think that's a feature yet. It's really annoying. Nothing is perfect. I feel like doing social media is just flitting between 5 different programs and none of them working. No worries, Lauren. Sorry, I didn't help at all, but no worries. Okay, I think we've got 3 minutes. I think we might be done. In which case, thank you all for coming. Thanks for tolerating me. Get in touch with us at the Audience Agency if you feel like we could help with anything. And yeah, definitely, the recording will be available afterwards. Oh, Hannah. Bye everyone, but I'll respond to Hannah's question as well. Ooh, the idea of combining audience data gathered via digital as well as face-to-face. That is actually something that quite a few people are looking into at the moment. Is it possible? It's possible in the sense that you could be integrating. I think you can only do it qualitatively at the moment. So asking for what kind of platforms people use, their opinions on digital content, and then tying that to where they've come from, their own demographics and all the rest. At the moment, I don't think anyone's properly made the link between people who've been to your sites and then engaged digitally, unless they do that through their own CRM database or something along those lines. But it's almost like the next stage. And I think it needs a sector-wide push from someone like ACE to be figuring it out, because yeah, I just started another sentence and didn't know where I was going to go with it because I didn't know the answer properly. But at the moment, Hannah, I think the short answer is no, but people are working on it. And I think if Arts Council are going to start asking for that, I think they'll be the ones to provide a system that will help us do that. And I think we all need to get to grips with it together, hopefully. Okay, and it's 1:15, so I'm going to go have a glass of water because my throat feels really parched. But thanks again, everyone, and hopefully speak to you all soon.